Everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully, you've been enjoying our today's discussions. We are wrapping up here with our closing keynote for this year's 2022 Symposium, Living with Uncertainty. And I am thrilled for the topic that we are ending on, which is the upside of uncertainty. I've actually been quite surprised, I think, throughout the day of not only have we talked about how hard it is and the fear that it invokes and the struggles that we have when we think about the politicization of science and how we deal with uncertainty. So I am super excited to take it really focused on us as individuals. Our last speaker just said all these individuals add up to a collective. And I have two amazing guests joining us today. They are a husband-wife duo. They have a book out that we have in our bookstore. If you haven't bought it, we'll absolutely drop you a link here, called The Upside of Uncertainty. We have with us Nathan Furr, who's a professor of INSEAD. Is that how you say that, Nathan?
INSEAD, yeah. So top
INSEAD.
business school outside of the U.S. So
Awesome. Okay, thank you. But I should have asked pronunciation beforehand.
no problem.
He's an author. He's published a number of books, including co-authoring Innovation Capital, Leading Transformation, The Innovator's Method, and of course this newer book, The Upside of Uncertainty. He's really widely recognized in the fields of innovation and technology strategy. And also joining us is Susanna Harmon-Furr. She's an entrepreneur, a designer, an art historian, and a contrarian, which I love. They're both based in Paris, so they're joining us quite late right now, and also the co-author of The Upside of Uncertainty. They're going to walk us through a little bit of a presentation today and some activities, and then we're going to have time for a Q&A moderated conversation for the latter, third of today's time. So I'm going to pass this off to them and let them get started. Thank you so much for being here today, Nathan and Susanna. It's a pleasure to have you.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's really fun to be here with all of you, and given that you're talking about uncertainty, and share some of these ideas. So we have to share slides because that's kind of like the professor thing to do. But what we want to talk to you very quickly through these ideas. As mentioned, I do this work on innovation and change and technology, and the thing about that is that it's really a book that's been 20 years in the making, even though we're feeling this uncertainty right now. And it really comes from this observation that to do anything new, these innovators I studied, they had to face uncertainty. And so I'm not very good at that. And so I wanted to know how do they get better? Now, we do live in a world with a lot of uncertainty. We're feeling it now, but there's some economists at Stanford and the IMF who track just political and economic uncertainty. And according to their measures, uncertainty has been on the rise for several decades. But that's not really what we're here to discuss, whether it's going up or down. We're here to talk about how it feels. And I always liked how Justin Solheim, the former CEO of Ben & Jerry's, said it. He said, listen, there's ambiguity and paradox everywhere. For people who like the linear route forward, life is getting harder and harder in any field. And that's the essence of the struggle, because I was taught the linear route forward, and I think many of us were.
So here's the deal. So it's increasing, we're all feeling it, but the dilemma is that most of us weren't really taught how to deal with it, as Nathan said. And when we're not taught to deal with something, it means we have low skills, and low skills with uncertainty is going to create this kind of chaotic thing. And so we're going to feel panicked. We're going to be overwhelmed. We might be frantic. And unfortunately, we do these things that we've listed around this little wonky blue cross thing that feels stressful. Like we might misinvent ourselves. We might choose something to force certainty instead of waiting for a better thing. So empirical evidence does show that we can get better at it. People can learn how to navigate it, that they can learn to feel more at ease. And there's, fields like ambiguity tolerance and uncertainty avoidance and resilience that show people can become better. But as Nathan said earlier, we learned that that it's possible, but how is the question that we kept wanting to figure out.
Especially for me, because I'm not good at it. I was like, give me something tangible, something substantial. So we interviewed all these innovators and creators and designers, and here's the essence of the framework we came up with. As I mentioned already, we love to talk about innovation and change and transformation, but that's like one side of the coin. We never or rarely talk about the other side of the coin, which is that to achieve these things, these people had to all step into the unknown. And so the core idea is that uncertainty and possibility are really two sides of the same coin. And I would challenge each of you to think about your own life and think about the things you're proud of. Maybe it's a career move or a relationship or a geographic move, whatever it is. Think back. I would bet that there was some uncertainty you had to face to get to that thing. So the things we're showing here are all things where you choose the uncertainty, you plan it, you step into it so that you can achieve something new. But the other side of that is that there's also unplanned uncertainty that happens to us. Like we all learned with COVID, or we're learning now with the things that are hitting us. And if you believe that thesis, uncertainty and possibility are two sides of the same coin, we would argue the same principle holds for unplanned uncertainty, that even though it feels so turbulent right now, there might be some possibility that you can pull out of the hand of cards that you've been dealt, whatever it may be. And here I want to acknowledge the downsides. The downsides are real and painful. We're not trying to ignore that. We're just trying to say what is nonetheless the possibility that might be there. And for me, the symbol that reminds me of this is Venice, this incredibly beautiful, rare gem in the world, which we forget is the byproduct of 300 years of uncertainty, as the people living on shore were threatened by invaders for those 300 years, forcing them into the lagoon, forcing them to become a superpower.
So we came up with 30 tools after doing all these interviews. And we realized, okay, we need to make it more tangible for people. So we came up with the first aid cross for uncertainty, this universal symbol of hope and help. And we decided to put them around 4 arms of tools, categories that kind of help you. And it's not a linear thing. So you might be bonking around from one to the other, depending on what you need. And you're going to keep going around this. But before we start telling you guys about this, we want to do a poll. So we're going to stop sharing our screen for a minute. But the question is going to be, and it's multiple choice, what is the level of uncertainty you currently face? So let's stop, and we're going to let's see if this works.
Yep, we're going to try to run the poll. And while we're waiting for the poll to run, we can just say a few words more about that first aid cross for uncertainty, which is really, it's 4 categories of things to do. And the tools are to help you do that category of thing. So we're just, we're stepping into the unknown ourselves as we kind of play with the poll in this fun StreamYard application.
Okay, so the poll is live. So this is fun.
Yeah. We're excited for the results. We could say something more, while people are waiting.
Well, the reason we want to know what are people like, what level are you at, is we encourage people, take a temperature of your uncertainty level, because our book is not aimed at getting you to take on every uncertainty all at once, or even to add uncertainties when your uncertainty is already way too high. It's just good to check in with yourself and say, wow, I am feeling way too much. I actually need to turn off burners, if there was a stove analogy going on, so that I can focus well and navigate this well. And we'll talk more about how to do that when the temperature is high. We'll be going there as well. But let's see if we can see results. I'm guessing that maybe we can't see them, but maybe someone else can.
Yeah.
And
we'll see. It might be still coming in. So that could be a part of it too.
It's fun to think about. But yes, reason the last choice is, not challenging enough, because our message is, okay, let's see.
Oh, top choice is B.
Okay,
we're closing it out, but the top choice.
So I think B was it's high,
B,
but there's
too
end
high,
in sight. Yes,
but end in sight. Okay,
that's good.
That's helpful for us to know. Yeah, so most people chose B, too high but in control. About 8 people chose challenging but manageable. Others were saying way too high and out of control, and a very few said not enough. Well, let's get back to the tools that we can share with you about both embracing the uncertainty that will kind of bring new possibility, but also navigating the uncertainty that is coming at you that's hard and challenging. So the first category of tools is really about reframing the uncertainty you face. in terms of not just the uncertainty, but the possibility. Why is this important? There's actually some very deep empirical research in psychology and behavioral economics that the way we frame something changes how we think, decide, and act. And framing is just how we describe it. So the iconic study is the Kahneman and Tversky study, for which they won the Nobel Prize, in which there's a situation, there's a disease, and there are two treatments. Treatment A is essentially a 95% chance of success, and treatment B, I'm simplifying, but it's 5% chance of failure. The point is they're statistically identical, and yet we all want the 95% chance of success. Why? That makes no sense. They're the same, right? It's because we're wired by evolution to be gain-seeking, to win, and loss-averse. This is now here's why this is such a big problem when it comes to uncertainty. If you believe for a moment or entertain that uncertainty and possibility are two sides of the same coin, if we're always framing what we're encountering in terms of the uncertainty, it will trigger that loss aversion and make us stressed out and make us freak out, and we'll run away from what possibility might be there. Versus if we frame it in terms of what possibility could be there, we'll have more energy and attention to do work towards some sort of outcome that would be better than had we not done that. So to make it simple, we're condensing this, but a great example of this is what happened during COVID-19. Again, this is not a pandemic book. It was started 20 years ago, but we did get to see how people responded to the pandemic. We were in the middle of writing it, and we saw some leaders frame what was happening. And I'm literally quoting with words like, "This is worse than the Great Depression. This is the worst thing we've ever faced." Now, when you frame it in terms of that loss and that uncertainty, what happens? Everybody freaks out. They're terrified. They're scared. And they start checking their bank accounts and looking for other jobs. And all this energy that could be going towards something proactive just goes down the drain of anxiety. Now, contrast that with, how Brian Chesky of Airbnb framed it. Now, some people love the company, some don't, but let's look at the situation was they lost 80% of their business in 8 weeks. So if anybody had a right to say this is the worst thing ever, it's them. And yet, what did he say? He said, this is our moment. This is great companies are forged in moments of crisis. This is our chance to show who we really are. Now, when you frame it in terms of that it unlocks like a new energy to do something. It's not ignoring the crisis. It's not wiping it away, but it's saying, what is still the possibility here? And, when he reflected on his own emotions, and we believe that this uncertainty ability starts with us as individuals, but, he said, the hardest thing to manage in a crisis isn't your organization, it's your own thoughts. So whether you're in a company or not, you can think about this as yourself. As a leader, you could think all is doomed. You can ask, why me? You can get paralyzed. Or you can tell yourself, this is my defining moment. It will leave indelible marks.
So that was the explanation of how reframe tools work. And we're going to dive deep on the one called frontiers. Because again, frontiers, what is that describing? It's just anything that you have not experienced yet. And I think what's interesting is some people they're more adventurous. They like to try new things. But a lot of people, even those adventurous types, often stay back from other frontiers in their life that they feel like, oh, that's not going to really impact my life, or there's nothing for me over there. But in reality, frontiers, some people say, is where they do their best work. And so we're going to share a story of one such person. David Hyatt, along with his wife, Claire, have a really great story. And so we're going to share a video, and we'd love for you to think about how he got on the frontier.
I think I've always loved business, but I've always thought that business can do good. And I think I've always thought that a business could be a tool for some kind of change that you believed in. Back in 1986, I arrived on Paddington train station and I had to go looking for work. And I got a job in advertising at a place called Saatchi & Saatchi. But I decided to myself that actually I climbed the wrong mountain. It was a beautiful mountain, but it was the wrong mountain. and that's why I quit London and wanted to get back to Wales. And the way to do that was by actually starting my own businesses. I asked myself, what am I going to go and do now? What do I do well? What does this town do well? And actually the answer was it made jeans. It was the biggest and best jeans factory in Britain, bar none. And in 2001, those gates closed, but those makers still had all the skills. And for me, if we go out of this town making jeans again, and we get 400 people their jobs back, and we go and prove actually you can make in Britain, and you can do it really, really well, then we'll have done a really great job. I've never been into that thing of just like, let's build a business to make a ton of money. But I've been really driven by actually, let's go make a ton of change. And I guess that's what drives me.
So, such an inspiring story. And what's so fun is he actually said this to us. He said, you can only do your best work when you're at the frontier, and you have to be at the frontier if you want to do something new. And I love the way he talks about doing something new, because if you think about it, he actually was doing something new in a different way, but in a place where it had already failed. So the jeans thing had left, the manufacturing had gone overseas, and he brought it back. But what was driving him was this feeling of, could I do this with the why of giving people their jobs back? And actually we visited the factory, and it's fun because at first he just slowly is able to hire people back. And it's a beautiful story of taking a risk, but being driven by this feeling of, I need to be in this place where I can do my best work. And so we're going to take a moment, and we just have some fun ways for you to think about how many frontiers you might have.
Yeah, we have many frontiers in our lives, whether it's career, relationships, social, intellectual. Take a look at this list, and we don't encourage you to step on to every frontier at once. But the dilemma is, most of us live our lives far back from the frontier because it's scary. But what if we reframed it as the place where we would do our best work? And so where's the frontier we need to step onto?
And really quickly, we'll just share a slide of, if you wanted to bring this to the workplace or to your team, there are frontiers in an industry, in a company, like with your customers or your employee relationship. So really quickly though, we have our first little reflection. We want to take 2 minutes for you just to think about. Think of a time when either you or someone you admire stepped onto a frontier. And first, what did they do? But how did it go? How did it unfold? How did it feel to be around that energy? And Nathan will share one that he likes to share really quick while you're thinking it. But if you already know what you're doing, just ignore him and jot down some notes of like, what frontier is beckoning me right now?
So I had a grandmother who was a real advocate for civil rights in a time when that wasn't as popular, and she was a real change agent. And I remember when we had this decision, it was, you heard we live in Paris. We didn't always live in Paris. We lived in the US. And it came time where I got this job offer at this top business school. It was a dream offer. We'd always wanted to live in France, but here's the problem. I had the job for life at a university. We lived down the street from Susanna's parents. Our kids were in school. Our oldest was in high school. How do you uproot a family that's so comfortable? And I asked people for advice. I remember asking this very colorful character of my grandmother, and she just cut to the chase. She said, Nathan, parents teach their children to live their dreams when the parents live their dreams. And at that moment, I had this moment of recognition. Well, we have to go live our dream. And so just take a moment to reflect on somebody you admire who stepped onto the frontier. If you feel stuck, by the way, you could ask yourself, what frontier is beckoning to you? When you think about the frontiers in your life. If you didn't feel like you finished, please pick this up later. But for the sake of time, we want to keep it moving forward because we just talked about one category of tools, reframing, and all the tools underneath it were to help you do that. The way Frontiers helped you reframe the scary zone that you sometimes face in your life. So the second category is actually what we call prime. Think about what prime means, how you prime a pump so water comes out, or an engine so it runs, or a wall. You prime a wall before you paint so the paint sticks. These are things you can do that will help you to be ready for uncertainty. And one of our favorites is this idea of uncertainty balancers. Excuse me.
I'll go ahead and share
please.
this. It's really fun because actually I didn't get to say I love uncertainty a little bit more than Nathan, although he's getting really good at it. But he, when we were asking people about uncertainty, so many of these entrepreneurial types are like, I love it. Some would say I eat it for breakfast. But when you dig a little deeper, you find out actually this person who said they eat it for breakfast actually is so intense about breakfast that she eats the same breakfast every day because she carries it with her in a little bag. It's her favorite granola. So what we started figuring out was people who do a lot of uncertainty have managed to find things that bring them comfort, that give them some sense of certainty that they can count on so that they can go out and do all the uncertainty that is more important, that the things they want to achieve. And so there's so many different kinds. There are habits, so that kind of granola morning thing could be one, but also rituals. There's fascinating studies that show that 70% of athletes do some kind of ritual before a game to kind of prime themselves up for feeling like they're going to go into it and do it well. Students doing that with exams as also. It could be outsourcing and simplification. It could be knowing every day what you're going to wear. You know, we all know about Steve Jobs and his black turtlenecks, and Obama and he had 2 colors of suit, and it made it easier to manage that uncertainty.
I'd say relationships and communities were probably the most important. So for example, one, entrepreneur and CEO, I remember interviewing him, he said, uncertainty is fuel for me. But when we dug underneath, he's like, oh, I guess it's true. I did marry my high school sweetheart and all my friends are from junior high. And he said, given how much uncertainty I traffic in at work, I want a very stable life. And so what we saw very commonly is people tried to create personal relationships that were stable or be part of communities. And so for example, we interviewed the actor Dallas Roberts, and he revealed that for a lot of actors, they might try for 100 roles and get one. I mean, that's a lot of uncertainty. And so he talked about how important the community of fellow actors was to navigating and managing that.
And it was interesting because that community was actually mainly via email. It wasn't that they all lived in the same town. It was that they could just they had a little chat where they would shoot back and forth like, and wishing each other well, but also knowing like, hey, better luck next time. So it's really powerful to have a cache, a storage of like lots of things that will give you comfort. And, it's fun to talk about with others. Our kids, just yesterday, one of our daughters was saying, my skincare routine at night is such an uncertainty balancer for me, which is really cute, and so it's important. Like I make sure she has the cleanser she needs and the different little yummy tonics, but like those things can just make our bodies and our minds feel at ease. And it's again, back to why is this important? Because humans are wired to fear the unknown. So anything we can do to give that comfort and calm is really balancing what we can take on. And remember when we talked about taking your temperature, uncertainty balances are there for you when your temperature is either way too high or even when it's just kind of, you're doing okay. Because if you're going to want to take on more uncertainty, you need more of these uncertainty balancers. So we are going to not do this poll question just because that took a little bit too long. We were going to ask you like, which genre of these do you use most often? Because it's fun to know. But instead, we're going to use this as a moment of reflection for you to think about which ones are you already using. So if we said anything that you're like, oh, I do that. I eat the same breakfast. Write it down quickly. But then let's focus on some that we maybe are leaving out that would really help us. So maybe you're seeing, I don't have enough people. I need to do more with the community. And you could even start your own community with one person even. It would be kind of wonderful. But ask also, do you have balancers that are kind of more like checking out or distractors and they're not rejuvenating. So of course, in this category is going to be tons of TV shows or series that you're kind of feeling like, I've got to get my show. And it can be good.
Some is okay.
Absolutely. But if there's too much of uncertainty balancers that are more of just a distraction, you might be having a hard time really feeling rejuvenated from your uncertainty balancer.
So why don't we give you a minute to reflect on that, and then we'll continue on. All right, if you haven't finished, you can always continue this afterwards. We were using the time to review our uncertainty balancers ourselves. And we were just thinking, gosh, we could do better at having a little cup of tea at night and, carving out some more time to really be quiet and to read. That would be a real uncertainty balancer for us personally. So, but just to summarize, what were we talking about? We were saying there's these categories of things you can do to prepare in advance. And we talked about uncertainty balancers is no human has infinite capacity for uncertainty, even those who claim they do. And instead create some islands of certainty for yourself to balance out the uncertainty that you have to face or you want to face. Well, the third category of things is about doing. And we chose the emblem of a sailboat because it's about catching the wind. It's not necessarily something you can force, but taking action is one of the best ways to resolve uncertainty. Now, there's lots of great research in here that talks about how to do that. For example, breaking something big and uncertain down into a series of small steps or experiments, research suggests is absolutely the best way to approach something uncertain. That feels a little more intuitive. So we thought we'd share something that we enjoyed finding out in the research process, which was a tool we called values over goals. And I think the thought experiment we would challenge you with is it possible to be failure proof when you face uncertainty? I mean, here's a situation where you don't know and you're going to take some action. And so by definition, how can you get it right? Well, you can stop worrying about getting it right if you focus on your values instead of your goals. And I think this was said very clearly by a very famous entrepreneur, David Hanmar Hansen, who created Ruby on Rails. So if you have apps on your phone, it's touched his technology. Basecamp, very popular services that he's created. And yet he talks about how he navigates uncertainty. And what he says is a lot of times, especially, those of us raised in, say, North America, we're taught set a goal and achieve it. But when you're setting a goal under uncertainty, you're really just making a guess and maybe not even a very good guess. And by focusing on that guess, you can get really anxious because you really have no control over whether that goal is going to happen. You have a little bit of influence, but you have maybe less control than you realize. But what David Hanmar Hansen argues you do have control over is your values. And so he talks about his own values, which are to write great software, treat his people well, and act ethically with the market. And he says, I can work several years on a project, spend millions on it, have it be a market flop, and it could still be a personal and company success because I achieved my values. And, I kind of learned this, in real time when we were working on this book, because again, we'd been working on this for a long time. And then suddenly the COVID-19 pandemic hits, and you had all these gurus and thought leaders out there who have bigger trumpets than I do, suddenly grounded at home, thinking about what? Uncertainty. And so I started to freak out. I'm going to get scooped. And Susanna was saying, hey, buddy, if you can't apply these tools to yourself, you don't get to write this book. And she really pushed me and said, why don't you focus on your values rather than the goal in writing this book? And the value is, hey, we have discovered some really interesting things. How do we share this in a way that can help our friends?
Well, and it helped us continually think through the tone again, because I had been championing let's talk less managerial and more to the human inside the manager. And so it helped you remember, like, oh yeah, we're writing this as if all of these people that are reading it are our friends.
I know. What's funny, as we're talking right now, I'm realizing we used all these business examples, but it's really written more to individuals than it is. Sorry, folks. I let my day job kind of come into this too much, but yeah, it's written, and so it's really to it changed the tone, it changed how we wrote it, who we wrote it to, which was to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. And the happy thing is, I think leaders are starting to get this idea, because I'm reading more and more about companies that are really, and just today we were talking to someone who is saying, these are our values and this is what's important. And I don't know if they're to the point yet where they could see not having their startup go launch as a success, but try it on. And personally, we actually have a little reflection that we won't give you as much time for, because we want to get to the last bit of tools. But basically what we're asking is, are there long-range goals that are impacting your happiness? So those ones that are outside, that are outside of your control, that you're thinking like, I need to have this many followers on my Instagram by like 6 months, or I need this to go exactly this way. Again, something outside of your control. And this idea that when we act from this values or principles centric place, we actually won't fail. We won't be perfect at our goals, but we are in control of what those goals or those values. We are in control of what our values are, and we can self-correct as we go. So we did want to encourage you just for a minute. Like if someone said to you, like that David Heinemeier Hansson had those 3 values for his companies. Do you have 3 values that you live your life by that motivate your choices?
And one thing I want to be careful of, in fact, we have it here on the slide, is to think twice about those values. And one of our friends is a very famous Palestinian American poet, Naomi Shihab Nye. And she writes a very moving poem called Famous, in which she says, I want to be famous as the one who smiles back. Famous as the one who always has a great joke, and actually she was famous.
She was famous
as this one smiles back. And then, but you added some other things in here. Sorry, I got all carried away.
Look up the poem Famous by Naomi.
But you gave people ways to think about being famous that are cool, like famous as champion dishwasher. I bet you'd like it if I was famous.
I did a typo. Famous, like the person who's always constantly a good listener.
Oh, yeah.
Or a great hugger. You know how some people, you hug them and it's just like, ooh, this is
so let's think broadly about the values too, because I just can't think, we can get obsessed by fame or by extreme outcomes, but really some of the most important people in the universe are the people who are never celebrated. And so, famous is the one who smiles back. That's pretty great. Well, for the sake of time, we encourage you to think about this on your own. But for the sake of time, we're just going to move forward, and we're just going to share this last category of tools, which is about sustaining yourself. And you'll notice actually the little symbol here is actually the coat of arms of the city of Paris.
We have a pretty one.
And it's really, it's this boat on this, if you actually look at it, these pretty wild waves. And there's this Latin motto that's translated as tossed, not sinking. And you can see this emblem all over Paris, just like this, you see it here. And I love it so much because here is this city that has faced every crisis, famine, war, plague, everything, and yet has still emerged the city of light, the light of the Enlightenment. And so that's how I want you to think about yourself. Okay, you feel tossed.
That's normal.
That's normal. You're wired. That's just your evolutionary heritage, but you won't sink. And so one of the categories of tools to help you do that is a reality check. It's just re-looking at the situation. So we got to interview Ben Feringa, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2016. And he was very clear that uncertainty was the key characteristic of all his work on his way to this breakthrough. But he admitted, hey, if you deal with frustration, you will face frustration. If you deal with uncertainty, you will face frustration, you will fail. And then he recommended, allow yourself to feel the frustration for a few hours or a few days, but then ask yourself, what can I learn from it? What's the next step that I could be working on? And what he was really doing is applying one of many different ways to reframe a frustration that hits you. In his case, it was, what do I learn? It could be many innovators we saw and interviewed said, well, life is a game. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You have to accept the losing if you want to hope to win. Or evolution is one that we often use when things are kind of clunky and not as great as we'd like it. We'll be like, well, maybe this is just a stage in the evolution. I personally have a fondness for the gratitude frame because when COVID hit, it was particularly hard for me because all my income comes from speaking and teaching. And that disappeared within like a week. I mean, a full calendar. And we had just bought an apartment. We had kids in university. I mean, it was so stressful. And I was staying up late. I was waking up early. And Susanna said again, hey, if you can apply these tools, you're too much of a hypocrite. You don't get to write this book. And I remember waking up one morning and I was doing something and it felt like my mind was just, the ridges of my mind were just on fire with the anxiety. And I remembered what Susanna said. And I remember this gratitude frame, which is about focusing on having gratitude for what you have rather than worrying about what you might lose. And at that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm grinding these coffee beans and they smell so good. And that the rich, earthy smell is so alive. And I was suddenly awake to it. And then I noticed, look at the sunlight coming in. I hadn't even noticed the sunlight coming into the kitchen. And it was such a beautiful morning. And it struck me how beautiful the morning really is, whether it's sunny or foggy. It really is a beautiful thing when the light comes back to the earth. And I had this moment where the stress just fell away from my shoulders because I thought, I could go bankrupt. I could lose the job. I could lose all of that. And I would still have this coffee beans. I would still have the morning. And I would still, if I'm lucky, have relationships with the people I love. And so that's what we mean by reframing the setback or the obstacle.
Just in closing, I don't know if you saw that first slide under sustained. We actually have 3 categories and we didn't touch on the first one, which is emotional hygiene, which is really what it sounds like. Just giving space and room and time to deal with the emotional feelings you're having.
And not beating yourself up because you took a risk
Right.
and it didn't go as you expected.
Right.
You were courageous is what I would say.
Yeah. So, and then reality check was that using those frames again for learning or gratitude. But I wanted to slip in how gratitude actually shows up in 2 tools of the sustain, because gratitude, and actually I think that story Nathan shared did end up being kind of a magical moment for him. And we use the word magic to really kind of wake you up and realize that really what we're talking about is those leaps of insight or those moments of serendipity or revelation or just mysteriousness where something happens and it changes the whole course of the uncertainty or the stress. And we're able to see the portal through. We're able to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to get through this thing. Or, you know, we make the phone call or someone calls us. Anyway, I'm not going to read this quote with you. And in fact, I hope that the planners of these sessions will share our slides with you because they're open to you. But gratitude is something currently we have 4 kids and one of our children is an artist and he drew this painting one day in school. And one thing that drives us crazy is he'll do stuff and then leave it at school. And we're like, wait, we wanted that. And it's like, oh, we cut it up and collaged it. But I think it's a beautiful still life. And it's fitting because he's had a lot of struggles with depression and and really challenging times in his life. And he's always reminding us about how gratitude is his portal into being able to handle hard times in his life. And he says, like today, he was saying, I just realized, like, look, I'm standing on my 2 legs. And, he's 21. He's a young adult. He has so many great things going for him, but he has had a lot of setbacks. But gratitude is always where he goes when things are feeling flimsy and stressful. And it was really encouraging to us today just to hear him. He was giving us a little lecture on gratitude and how for him it always shifts him into this ability to keep himself going. So in closing, that was our last little reflection. We want to hear your questions and hope you have some. So here's our red first aid cross for uncertainty.
4 categories of things to do. 1, reframe the what's happening, not just in terms of the uncertainty. It's okay to acknowledge that, but don't forget the possibility. And we talked about the frontier as a tool to help you reframe. Number 2, prime. You can prepare for it. And we talked about uncertainty balancers as a way to help you balance that out, as one of the many tools to help you prepare. Do, you can take action. And we talked briefly about breaking it down into small steps, but also focusing on your values over your goals. And then lastly, you can sustain yourself. You can, and we talked about these frustration management frames to help you overcome that. If you're curious and you want to know more, we did write about all these tools on the upside of uncertainty.com. And the book is in the bookshop as well, which we're always grateful when folks pick that up because we wanted our friends to get it.
And one last little thing I should add is that we are working on an asynchronous course that will be kind of like the format you saw today, where we will do deep dives on every single tool that you can work on at your own pace. And there's a community that's totally free. We actually haven't priced our course yet. It's going to be super affordable, cheaper than the book even. But we are excited to have people join the community and just discuss, hey, this uncertainty is getting me down. What should I do? Or just to encourage each other. So, so happy to share with you and excited to hear. There's Tricia.
Questions.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate your whole presentation because I think there's so much about just how we each individually relate to uncertainty that's so important when we are dealing with not only our own personal ways of dealing with uncertainty, but helping others deal with uncertainty. What would you say is the best way to really show empathy to other people who are dealing with uncertainty? Because each of us deal with uncertainty in very different ways. And when you're working with diverse groups of people, particularly for maybe a lot of our audience on very complex problems that are very difficult and take a lot of time and energy to try to solve and sort out, and there's a lot of diverse viewpoints at the table, obviously having empathy really is the thing that would promote positive dialogue. How would you suggest people have empathy or show empathy for the different ways that people process uncertainty?
Yeah. Tricia, I want to put a point on what you just said, which is so critical. It's really important to start with empathy. We just breezed over that emotional hygiene piece.
Yeah.
But you can't just jump into reframing in terms of the possibility without genuinely showing empathy from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is hard. This is complex. This is challenging. And to care for that, I slipped it in there as well, to not beat ourselves up or somebody else up because of, we're doing our best. That's another way to reframe it, by the way. We're doing our best. So, and then I think once maybe you have more about how you can show that empathy, but I just want to emphasize, start with empathy when dealing with others and with groups, and especially in hard situations. So a beautiful example of this is, I remember at this, when things were crazy with COVID, the mayor of Paris did a very nice job of this and expressed deep empathy for all the people who had suffered losses, all the people who were afraid, all the people who were working day and night to deliver care. And then once the empathy has been shown and you've honored the hard part, then we can move into, now, how do we unite to do something here? And you mentioned complex situations. We really admire the work of Dr. Ayanna Johnson, who's a marine biologist, and she frames up this great climate dilemma and crisis and all the complexity of views and technologies and inputs. And she just framed it with this really cool question: what if we get this right? And even that like kind of starts your brain thinking in a little bit more positive light of like, gosh, maybe it's not all gloom and doom. Maybe it's possible that if we really work together, we could get this right. And I think that can be a cool unifying question.
Yeah. I think he answered it. I mean, I think that empathy can show up even sometimes we want to have that emotional part, but then we have a tool we call know your risks. And sometimes it can be good too to say, okay, like let's own up where our risk aversions are. And mine is I'm really scared in this arena. And I noticed you're really good on that. And like let's help each other. So getting really sometimes, looking at it as, okay, we're all going to have different strengths and weaknesses and not feeling like one is better than the other, but like we all need each other and creating those safe spaces by really feeling safe.
Yeah. Like I'm financially risk averse. Susanna's less so. And so if we can honor that and have a conversation about that, then we can start getting at compromise rather than at conflict.
No, I love that. Another thing that I was thinking about, I love your book and how it really offers some very practical tools for how to use different levers to kind of understand how to work through uncertainty. And I know one of those, like, because uncertainty can cause a lot of anxiety, and in an effort to mitigate that anxiety, a lot of times people will settle for suboptimal certainty. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about, I know you call that the forcing the machinery. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that concept.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Where do we even start?
So let's start with the term.
Yeah.
So first off, let's talk about the tendency and where the term came from. So the tendency is, so just by the way, if uncertainty makes you anxious, I'll say, welcome to being a human being. That's a fact. And this is where it comes from. Evolution wired us this way because for a couple 100,000 years, there wasn't a lot of benefit or upside to going 50, 100 miles from where you lived. You're probably just going to starve, get eaten, or get killed. But the world's changed. Our environment has changed. Our evolution hasn't caught up. You go 100 miles away, you're not going to starve, get killed, get eaten. But there are opportunities, a lot of them, for doing new things. So that's the fundamental shift. That's why you feel the anxiety, but you got to work to face it well, because evolution hasn't like caught up with us yet. And so that's number one, that the tendency is when we feel that anxiety, we want to grab at something, anything, maybe suboptimal, just because it's certain it makes us feel better. And the term "don't force the machinery" comes from a friend whose father was a master mechanic. And so this person, his grandfather, really worked with machines and gears, and this wisdom he shared of, don't force it. When you force it, you can break it. And you just need to be patient while you figure out how it works. And I think that's a really nice metaphor for life, because so often it's so hard to wait. But what we need to do is take a deep breath, do the emotional hygiene, and wait. I'll give you an example.
Actually, can I share one?
Oh, please. I'll shut up.
Nathan is such a talker. Sometimes
Yeah.
like,
You got it. Yeah.
Okay. So when we were writing the book and we were talking to friends of ours all the time and asking them stuff, but this friend of mine they were living in France as well, but they were heading back to the US, and
it was worse than that.
No.
Their jobs had been cut. They couldn't find jobs.
They had tickets to the US in 2 days with their 4 kids, but no home, no jobs, nothing, because his offer had been rescinded. They'd already re-rented their home to the renters. I mean, it was a really stressful thing, but they had a job in a state they didn't want to go to, a job they didn't like. And she said, and their kids were calling them losers. They were like, you guys are the worst losers. And what was interesting is these people were so close to just taking it because they felt like we're waiting too long. And anyway, I told her about this tool of don't force machinery and to wait, and to reframe their ability to be good parents and a good partnership. And sure enough, they arrived. They had like a hotel for a few nights, but within literal 3 weeks, she wrote me this text that was so jubilant. It was like, we figured it all out. We both have jobs. We found a fixer-upper. And I know that sounds really silly, but it really worked that way because they were able to go into that waiting phase. And you know what? They needed uncertainty balancers. And in that case, it was actually telling their families, stop asking us every day if we know what we're doing. That was actually we don't want anyone to contact us unless it's something like, hey, we're thinking of you guys. We know you're going to do it. Because do you know yet? Do you know yet? Getting pinged all the time. So yeah, don't force machinery is great. I could keep talking about that. We have a daughter right now who thought she was going to go to one university, got there, didn't like it, and it's like, but I'm just going to do this easy thing instead. And we're like, no, wait. And it's hard to. It feels yucky because you thought you made the choice and then it wasn't right, So how do you do it? Uncertainty balancers and reframing. Like, no, something good is coming.
I love that. One of the things that we hear often is this idea of don't sweat the small stuff. Do you feel like that is a appropriate way to think about uncertainty or to process through uncertainty, or you feel like that's not really getting at sort of the deeper pieces of that?
I guess I have always thought that meant, don't worry too much about the little teeny details.
Over which you have no control.
For sure, if you have no control over it. But, I think what's fun about what we learned from talking to so many people about uncertainty is sometimes if it's a little detail that's kind of like going in your mind and kind of beckoning you, it might be the portal through.
Okay. I gotta jump in here. So you're talking about that curiosity.
Yeah.
Which is a good guide. But I think when I hear small stuff, it's this tendency to want to control and to and I would definitely say when it comes to uncertainty, as somebody who struggles with this, what I've learned is just kind of surf it. Ride the wave and not worry so much about it. I mean, so when you said that, don't set the small stuff, it totally resonated with me. Whereas I think because I've had to learn, I tend to want to but I've got all these things I got to do and I got to make sure I finish it in time. And I got to instead just ride the wave of this crazy stuff that's happening.
Right.
Where you're talking about
I'm talking about the periphery, the little small stuff sometimes is pay attention to stuff if it's small, but it continually is showing up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right, because the small things can sometimes be like, oh my gosh, that was the jewel that I was just, ignoring.
Exactly. No, I can totally see that. Before we wrap up here, I had one more question for you, and that is, sometimes when dealing with uncertainty, we can focus so much on the constraints that we sort of lose our ability to think more imaginatively or take a more creative problem-solving approach to uncertainty. So I would love for you guys to talk a little bit about just how rethinking resources or reimagining resources. I love that concept of just how that can really be productive.
Well, there's such a beautiful story in the book about a gentleman who was in charge of transforming Melbourne with no budget. And he did it by just seeing what do we have a lot of that's not being valued. And it was things like the laneways, these teeny little funny half blocks that were just not being used. And he gave them to people and they took over it. And now they're the funnest, coolest, hippest places to be in Melbourne. So he did it with no money. But I think there's so many beautiful articles about this online too, of just looking up constraints often are fuel for creativity. And so what we have to remember is if we're waiting to do something because we think, well, I don't have all the things I need yet. There's so many ways to get going now, and it can often be better work. In fact, I know a lot of companies put constraints on that they really don't have on budgets and stuff to get people thinking in new ways, because sometimes when we have all the money to do stuff, it actually kind of fizzles. It doesn't have that pizzazz or that spunk that comes out of need that's real.
There's a saying in the field of creativity that creativity loves constraint. And one of my favorite examples was a woman who created a program to teach computer literacy to folks in prison. Yes. And there you have these huge obstacles of getting devices in, giving them connectivity, and she came away from this incredibly challenging task saying, I have learned to see the constraint as fuel. Now that's a little bit extreme maybe for some of us. Nobody likes constraint. We're not saying it feels good. I mean, of course you like it if everybody gives us all the permission and money and all that stuff. But the point is to get going now and see what could we do with what we have. And today, Susanna, that Melbourne is one of the most livable cities in the world, but without a budget, and by just saying, what do we have a lot of? We have laneways, we have trees, we have empty buildings. What could we do with an empty, valueless building? Oh, it turns out you could transform it into a wonderful place to live if you think creatively about it.
I love that. Well, I'm going to wrap us up here. I want to thank you both so much for joining us today and for providing a lot for everyone to think about and ruminate on, and definitely encourage everybody in the audience to get their book and to check out their website. And thank you both so much for your time and all of your thoughtfulness today.
Thank you, Tricia.
So fun to be
Thank
here.
you to everybody.